Welcome back to N's NotebookLM. Today we're diving into a story of incredible transformation, a look at Brazil's 20th century. We're talking about a nation that went from oligarchs to dictators, from so-called economic miracles to absolutely crippling debt. It was this relentless, fascinating cycle of crisis and reinvention.
And this really gets to the question at the heart of it all. How does a country actually break free from its past to forge a modern future? Well, Brazil's story gives us a pretty dramatic and often contradictory answer. So let's get into it. All right, so our story kicks off right around the turn of the 20th century, in a period called the First Republic. Now, on paper, it looked like a democracy, but in reality, not so much. It was a system completely run by and for a tiny, powerful group of landowners, which, as you can imagine, was setting the stage for a huge crisis. To really get this era, you have to understand a concept called coronalism. This was the absolute backbone of the whole political system. You had these local bosses, the coronels, and they weren't actual military colonels, they were just powerful landowners who controlled literally everything: jobs, land, and the big one, votes. In a system like that, where votes are basically owned, a real democracy is pretty much impossible.
So who was running the whole show? Well, at the national level, politics was totally dominated by an alliance between the two richest states. You had São Paulo, the coffee king, and Minas Gerais, the dairy and agriculture giant. And they had this power-sharing deal known as the Coffee and Milk Alliance, where they literally just took turns picking the president. It was all designed to make sure federal policy kept them rich.
But, a system that rigid is basically a house of cards. When the Great Depression hit, it completely shattered the coffee economy, and the whole thing came crashing down. And in 1930, a revolution brings this man to power, Getúlio Vargas. His promise? To smash the old system and build a modern, unified Brazil by any means necessary.
And Vargas's time in charge was, well, it was long and it was complicated. He starts out as a revolutionary leader, then gets properly elected in 34. But then, and this is where it gets wild, just 3 years later, he stages a coup against his own government. Think about that. He creates this dictatorship, the Estado Novo, or New State, which lasts all the way until he's finally kicked out by the military in 1945. So the big question is, what did he do with all that power? He fundamentally remade the country. He centralized the government, taking power away from those local colonels. He went all in on state-funded industrialization, building up Brazil's infrastructure. He even introduced the country's first real labor laws, which earned him the nickname Father of the Poor. But, and this is a huge but, all this came at a massive cost: absolute state censorship, powerful propaganda, and the total crushing of political freedom. Okay, so Vargas is out, and in 1945 Brazil enters this new democratic phase. But this period, which ran until 1964, was anything but calm. It was more like a pressure cooker, with all these competing forces and a growing sense of anxiety just bubbling under the surface. So on one hand, you had incredible things happening. The country was industrializing at a crazy speed, building this stunning new capital, Brasilia, out of nothing. But on the other hand, politically, things were getting really ugly. You had populist movements, strong unions, and a deep-seated conservative fear of communism. And remember, this is all happening during the Cold War. The democracy was incredibly fragile, caught right in the middle of it all. Eventually, that pressure cooker just exploded. In 1964, the military stepped in again. Now, it's important to understand their thinking. This wasn't just a grab for power. They truly believed that democratic chaos was holding the country back. Their goal was a conservative modernization, basically to force progress and economic order from the top down. And this brings us to the great paradox of the military regime, because what followed was this period of absolutely mind-blowing economic growth built on a foundation of some of the most brutal political repression imaginable. Just look at these numbers. From 68 to 73, the economy was growing at almost 10% a year, every year. It was called the Brazilian economic miracle. And for anyone who supported the regime, this was all the proof they needed. The country was booming. Brazil was becoming a serious player on the world stage. And it looked like their plan was working. But that miracle, it came at a terrible, terrible price. The main tool they used was something called Institutional Act No. 5, or AI5. You have to understand, this wasn't just another law. It was basically a switch that turned off democracy. It shut down Congress, it suspended the Constitution, and it gave the government total unchecked power to arrest, censor, and purge anyone they considered an enemy with no questions asked. And the impact was immediate. That number you see, over 2,600 people, those were careers, lives, and families in the civil service and military, just wiped out. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't even begin to count the thousands who were arrested, exiled, or killed. That was the real human cost of the miracle. Well, by the late 70s, the economic miracle was running out of steam. The military knew it couldn't hold on to power forever, so it began this very slow, very controlled process of opening things back up, which brings us to the last phase of this cycle, the return of democracy. Now, here's the key thing. This wasn't a revolution. It wasn't the people storming the palace. The military basically managed its own departure. It was a process they called abertura, or opening, and their whole strategy was slow, gradual, and secure. It happened in careful stages, eventually leading to a civilian president being chosen in 1985. So, in 1985, Brazil is finally free. The dictatorship is over. But the celebration didn't last long, because the new civilian government was handed a complete and utter economic disaster. I want you to really let this number sink in. 223%. That was the annual inflation rate the year before the handover. That means prices were more than tripling every single year. The country was also drowning in foreign debt. So here we go again. Freedom was won, but the new government was born right into another massive crisis. So you see the pattern, right? It's this incredible, recurring cycle. Every major break in the century starts with a promise to fix a huge problem, but it always comes with a steep price. Vargas promised modernization, but the price was dictatorship. The military promised order, but the price was human rights. And democracy brought freedom, but it inherited economic chaos. When you boil it all down, that's what Brazil's entire 20th century was about. It was this constant, painful struggle to walk a tightrope, trying to balance the desperate need for economic progress with the fundamental need for democratic freedom. Which brings us right up to today and leaves us with one last big question. Brazil has now had decades of democracy. Messy at times, for sure, but continuous. It's beaten hyperinflation. So when you look at all this history, you have to wonder, has that cycle of crisis and rupture finally, truly been broken? If this topic has captured your interest and you'd like to dive deeper, the book is called A Concise History of Brazil by Boris Fausto.